The East African tradition of the Maasai tribe is to greet one another with the words Kasirian Ngera, which is Swahili for, so how are the children? In that community, the well-being of their children is the highest priority. If you are interested in participating in thought-provoking conversations about the well-being of children and families, please tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on 860 AM WNOV. Together, we can save our children.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine Reed, along with Sean Roby. We have the blacksmith, Dr. Smith, in, along with Miss Arnita Holloman. Good afternoon, panel.
Good afternoon.
All right. We're going to be talking about a lot of things today, but our main topic is collective trauma the impact of collective trauma on child, family, and community well-being. So the impact of collective trauma on child, family, and community well-being. But before we get into that, I'm going to make a couple of community announcements. Hope everybody is doing great out there. And if at any point during this next hour you would like to join this conversation, you can call 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. Now, I'm sure you all have already heard the advertisements played over and over and over again about one of the most important child welfare conference to come to the state of Wisconsin. It's the only one of its kind, and that's the Color of Child Welfare Conference Against All Odds, From Foster Care to Success. That will take place on May 17, 2016. At the the Crown Plaza Hotel out there by the airport. Mm-hmm. And what's so unique about this particular conference is because it's the only conference in the state that convenes to solely address the needs of black children and their families who are involved in the foster care or child welfare system. And we are excited to have successful individuals who were once in foster care present at the conference. We're talking about folks like judges, politicians, educators, authors. They'll all be in the room educating us how they were able to be resilient, how they'll be able to turn the odds of the tables in their favor, which says that we all can do that, even if we've experienced some form of trauma.
That's right.
Or disappointment.
Absolutely.
Or challenges. And we're going to talk about is trauma, challenges, all that kind of stuff, the same thing. But anyway, these folks are going to be there, and they're going to educate us and give us some insight on what we can do. If they made it, we can make it. So that will be on May 17th, and some of those workshops will include the journey of black children foster care from total exclusion to over-inclusion. How did that happen? Cultural considerations in assessing trauma in urban communities. We'll be taking a look at the Philadelphia ACE study. How about black single mothers and the child welfare system? That's going to be a great one. Then we have rules of engagement, how to use family engagement program to improve outcomes for black families involved in child protective services. We also have Dana World Patterson and the fabulous Martha Love. They'll be presenting on dispelling the Jezebel myth, understanding the historical roots of systematic sexual exploitation and trafficking of girls and women of color, the role of kinship care in preserving African American families. That will be a panel discussion. And then we have this other one I think is going to be really great, Beneath the Mask, an introspective look at the impact of racism in our personal and professional lives. And we're going to give away 2 registrations today on the show to the Color Child Welfare Conference, which is a value of about $120-some. So you don't want to miss this. You can give us a call at 414-444-5250. In a few minutes, we're going to announce that. And if you'll be caller 5 in a few minutes when we announce the contest. And then we also know that the Black Child Development Institute, they're doing great work in our community around advocating for African-American children or black children in Milwaukee. They will have their 9th annual Shining Stars celebration on May the 19th. See, that week of the Color Child Welfare and the Shining Stars is a really great week because it's the week of the black child. So there's going to be a lot of great events that are going on throughout the city, but these are 2. So that event is going to take place on Thursday, May 19th at the Grace Center, 250 East Juneau Street. You can contact Black Child Development Institute at 855-653-2234, 855-653-2234 to learn more information about cost and other details. And then, you know what? Did you all hear that Harriet Tubman is going to be replacing our friend Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill? So that is great. That's great.
History.
That's great. And she's going to be the first female, you know, on some paper. That's all right. I like that.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. And ironically, in 1853, General Harriet Tubman began her work with the Underground Railroad. So again, we say thank you, General Tubman, for all that you do. April is STD awareness. Folk need to know about that. National Child Abuse Prevention, Sexual Assault, Prevention, Alcohol, and Autism, and Stress Awareness Month. So there's a lot that's going on. But we're going to get into this conversation about the impact of collective trauma on child, family, and community well-being. And let me say before we delve into this conversation, I'm really ready to jump deep into this. But I just want to say thank you to the listening audience. You all are dedicated to listening to this show every week. I get calls all the time from folks saying how much they enjoyed it. It was a resource to them. And that makes it worth the while coming in here on a real nice sunny day and sitting here talking about all the stuff that goes on. But thank you all for tuning in. And so the impact of collective trauma on child and family community well-being. Now, we know that multiple generations of families can transmit the damage of trauma throughout the years. That's intergenerational transmission of trauma. That's real basic. Some social workers are aware of and detect the subtle and not so subtle effects on family and community and the people. And I don't know if it's just not social workers, but maybe sometimes we, everyday folks, don't really understand the impact of trauma that, our bodies, the physiological effect of it, the psychological, emotional effect of trauma. But today, and I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to throw it out there to the listening audience. I know we hear a lot about the term trauma. And I often wonder if we're just overusing the term. Is everybody traumatized? What makes the difference between somebody being traumatized, not being traumatized? What is the litmus test? I mean, what does trauma look like? And so we're going to talk about that. We also will talk about what collective trauma is, and there's different forms of trauma. I guess there's historical, and that might be the same. Is that the same as historical and collective? Shared trauma, then you've heard terms about compound trauma. Then you have I think there's like 1, 2, 3 levels of trauma before it's just, one recurring event versus something that is ongoing versus something that is toxic, whatever. So these mental health professionals will clear me up and get me a better understanding as we go through the course of this conversation, because I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay?
You're doing good.
I'm doing good. All right. Well, good then. And so, and then we're also going to talk about traditional ways that African Americans deal with trauma. All right? So again, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm ready to go. We're ready. I can't do this today. I can't. Well, I'm just putting it out there. They can call. Yeah, but we need to talk until they call. All right. She traumatized me.
Well, no, I mean, just to go to your original question, we talk about the term, trauma. You said, is it overused and whatnot like that? So it's a difference. It's almost like depression. So you think about, is depression overused? Well, we can all be depressed at some state of time, but then there's a difference between being, depressed for a moment and being chronically, depressed, being clinically depressed. So when we talk about trauma, it's the same kind of fashion. Sometimes something can happen where you're traumatized by it and you can get over it. But there's some things that's happened to you where you say, you know what, this causes almost like what we call a new normal. Like what has happened has been so significant that even if I recover from it, my life will never be the same, but I can get a different level of quality of life, but it's just a different type. And most of the time when we get that, it goes in conjunction, with depression, because it's after you've had a loss of a loved one. That's a very traumatizing event. But we go on with our lives because it's something that happens. We all deal with different issues every day. So I think that hits your points, Jermaine. It's like, is everything traumatizing? Yeah, everything can have a traumatizing effect, but I think the lingering effects of it is the question that we're talking about today. So when we talk about a collective traumatization of a community, well, when you look at something like the ill effects of slavery, then you're going to see that that's going to have lingering effects on everything. When you go into a movie theater and you look at something like 12 Years a Slave, and if it's a diverse group, you can see all of the white people get a little uncomfortable because they understand, what their ancestors did. And you look at the black people and you get a couple of reactions. Some you get crying because, you know, you can feel that pain. You get into that footstep. And then some you get like numb. It's almost like they're paralyzed. You don't know what to do. And then you get a sect that's just upset and want to, you know, take revenge right now for what done, you know, years ago. And so when we talk about traumatization, you know, it's like you said, how do I get over it? Well, this is the great thing about it. Like we said, you can kind of get a new normal. Even though you've been traumatized, the good thing about it is that there are different things that we can do to be resilient, to be to persevere through those difficult times, and then to still carry on. You know, we look at Black people here in America, those specifically who were involuntary immigrants, whose ancestors were taken over in the Middle Passage, and you say, wow, what things that we've done as a collective people. No, you can look at a lot of things and say, hey, you know, this is messed up about our community, some things that need to be improved. When you look at what we've done collectively with all of the ills, all of the obstacles that we've had before us, and you go to slavery, you go to Jim Crow, you go to all of just the covert. Well, Reconstruction was actually pretty good for us. That showed what we could do when you give us a chance, but that's what entered into Jim Crow. And so when you start to look at those factors right there, you say, you know what, it's hard to recover from trauma if you're still being burdened by the trauma that got you there. I can't forgive you for stabbing me in my back while you're still stabbing me in my back and the blood is still flowing. So when we look at ourselves specifically as African Americans in this country, you say, okay, well, we'll get over slavery, but it's still so many different things that are the ill effects of slavery where we're still being hurt, where you say, well, how can you forgive when these things are going on? And that's why I said it's the beauty and the resilience and the power of our people to see how many people have done great things. And I'm not just talking about people who have titles and things of that nature behind their name, but I'm talking about our everyday good citizens that do good things, those local heroes that sometimes don't get noticed or get recognized, that go on despite the many ills that they face on a day-to-day basis.
So one question I will have for you, you've named a couple events, different types of events that cause collective trauma. You know, things I was reading was talking about 9/11 being one, you know, the bombing of the World Trade Center, you know, the Middle Passage, Jim Crow era.
So there's like God-made traumas and man-made traumas.
Okay.
Or events that
Or
can be
nature.
traumatizing.
Oh,
so
oh.
the
The flooding
God-made
that-
would be considered the
flood like
natural
Houston.
disasters.
Natural
Right.
disasters.
Natural disasters.
Katrina.
And then you've got the man-made events. Those are, you
that
know,
we create.
mass shootings, right, bombings, things we create.
What about
And so
the
they-
food poisoning, all the stuff we got going on, all these?
Again, that's a man-made one.
Okay.
I mean, if you're purposely not filtering water and so
I
on,
got
that's man-made.
Okay.
That's preventable.
So when I'm looking at, let's talk about child welfare foster care, I'm talking about foster care USA. You know, the problem that we see going on in foster care is so much bigger than just what happens here in the state of Wisconsin, what happens here in the city of Milwaukee. From a collective standpoint, is foster care a traumatic event? Does it cause collective trauma? When you have, just looking at our local numbers, 68.2% of the foster care population that represent Black children, when we look at the collateral damage, you know, and these numbers continue to be around that 68 to 73% year after year, decade after decade. When we look at the long-term impact or effect of that, does that cause to this community collateral damage or collective damage?
I don't know about collateral damage, but collective damage, yes, because, you know, you look at it and you understand where it came from. A lot of times we're in the business of criminalizing poverty and situations like that. So when we look around, it's just a reminder of everything that's been done to us as a people and how we've never been able to, for whatever reasons, you know, be able to reach our full potential. It's like it's always been something there to prevent us from getting to that next major goal. So when you talk about within the foster care home, you say, can it be is that
system,
traumatizing?
not so much in foster home, but in the foster care system.
I think the foster care system in itself, we expect too much of it. We expect it to do things that it can't do. So when we talk about whether natural-made disaster or man-made disaster, we expect the system to fix some ills that a society in itself created already. So we put it in an unfair system. You have some people in foster care who just do it for the money, let's be real, you know, because it's a financial benefit. Right. But you have some people who truly care, who truly put their heart and soul into it, and it's a difficult position. Working in Children's Hospital within the trauma department, working with a lot of families that had brought on, you know, that worked in treatment, foster care homes, permanent or residential statements like that, they didn't realize what they were getting into. And it was like, you know, they came in with a good heart and they wanted to help someone. But that's a very difficult thing. So when we start talking about trauma, it goes trauma both ways, because when you have a person who has a good heart and they want to do something, and they recognize that this is a child that I wanted to help, but I feel almost helpless in the system that has brought this child into my house is maybe not giving me all of the things that I need to survive, or all of the things to help this child thrive, that becomes frustrating in itself. And so when we start talking about being traumatized, the helper can be traumatized, and when the helper is traumatized, that makes them less effective to help the child.
Yeah.
And when you talk about secondary trauma, vicarious trauma is what we might experience watching like 9/11, like you see the plane go in the building and we feel for them. We didn't experience, but that's more of a vicarious. Secondary is when you've been actually like in a trauma,
the helper.
and then you become traumatized because you can't give all of the help. So like a firefighter from 9/11, in a sense.
And I think to add to that, when you talk about foster homes in themselves, and the fact that you mentioned the new normal, and reading a referral on a kid, and they have a multitude of mental health diagnoses and unfortunate circumstances that they've had to endure for 3, 4, 12, 15 years, and now your experience is totally different from theirs, and then to put you all together, and you've went through X amount of trainings, that training can only go so far, but then your experience can only go so far. But when you put them together, it makes you more equipped, but then there's still nothing like the actual practice of working with that individual, because there's so many cases that are specific to whatever that circumstance is. So we have to keep that in mind when working with kids, because I tell people all the time during trainings, you can get 7 5-year-olds, and they're all going to have some similarities, but they're all going to have different personalities and come with differences. And so that's so critical for all of our providers to keep in mind, because sometimes you get people that say, well, my children didn't act like that. Well, guess what? These are not your children, and these kids have different experiences. So we have to keep that in mind and understand that we have to meet these kids where they are.
No, we're talking about whether or not foster care, the system, causes community trauma. When we look at the numbers, the rate of African American children who come into the system, their disproportionate representation in the system, how long they stay in the system, least likely to be adopted. Some of them careen from the foster care system, go into the juvenile correction system, and from juvenile correction, sometimes find themselves in the adult correction system. So when we talk, and I use the term collateral damage, when you start looking at their children, right? And there were some statistics that I had read. One was by the Department of Justice, where they had surveyed some inmates in Cook County, Illinois, and also in Orange County. And in those population, those inmates indicated it was 80% and 70 and 80%. I forget which community represented what percentage, but that at one point in time in their life, they were in their childhood, they were in foster care. That's a huge number. So we look at collateral damage. When we look at these traumatic events, or these events that create what's called community trauma or widespread trauma to a group of people, when we look at police and community relations, and we look at the number of African American men in this state, in this city, who are incarcerated, who are removed from their families, that's the collateral damage that I'm talking about. But does that also cause community damage?
Oh yeah, because that collateral damage is within the community.
Well, not community damage, but community trauma, a traumatic impact, or community trauma. That's what I'm trying to get at. With incarceration, high numbers of incarceration, police brutality, these things that we as black men, as black young youth, that we experience, and we live up under that surveillance.
Yeah, no, because I think that's what we talked about this a few shows ago. We talked about like a racial socialization, and I think that's the community trauma, because when you are a person who are disenfranchised as a people, those who take care of you teach you to survive in a different manner.
Right.
And that
we're going to talk about that.
And so that's very traumatizing, because you almost feel as though, we talk about second-class citizenship, though it's something wrong with me, as though I'm inferior. Why do I have to go above and beyond just to get what's normal for everybody else?
And again, I think that speaks to, I'm sorry.
Well, let me take a break. We want to take a break, and then we're going to come back with Mr. Rowe. We're going to finish this conversation on the impact of collective trauma on child, family, and community well-being. You're listening to Fresh Start Today.
This is Jermaine reporting from Fresh Start's WBCM studio with breaking news. Black children are flooding the local foster care system. Infant boys and girls coming straight out the womb, which means you probably have a black child in foster care, you are a black child in foster care, you're related to a black child in foster care, or you may even be a case manager or service provider for a black child in foster care. If so, then you don't want to miss the Color of Child Welfare Conference on May 17th. Fresh Start Family Services will host the only conference in the state that convenes to strictly focus on the needs of black children in foster care. This year's theme is Against All Odds, from foster care to success. There will be national and local presenters like judges, authors, educators, politicians, and journalists who were formerly in foster care, and many others. Some of the workshop titles include Black Children's Journey in Foster Care, From Total Exclusion to Over-Inclusion, Psychotropic Drug Dependency in Black Children, Black Single Mothers and the Child Welfare System. There's so much to talk about. To join the conversation, register today for the Color Child Welfare Conference and Recruitment Fair on May 17th. Call 414-351-1100. That's 351-1100. Limited seats available. This is Jermaine signing off from Fresh Start WBCM, Wisconsin. Black Children Matter.
So it's 3:29 in the afternoon on Wednesday, April the 20th, and if you'll be caller number 5, you can win a free registration to the Color of Child Welfare Conference on May the 17th, 2016. Now, if you know a black child who's in foster care, maybe they're on your caseload, maybe they're your grandchild, maybe they're your child, your brother, your sister, maybe you're a person who have been in the foster care system. But for those individuals who have an open case right now, we would love to have you participate in this conference to attend it, and we can make some things happen where you can get to the conference. You would need to call 414-351-1100, extension 150 for that one. But for right now, caller number 5 can win a free conference registration to the Color Child Welfare Conference. Now, we're talking about the impact of collective trauma on child, family, and community well-being. And Mr. Roby, you were going to say something before I ask this question.
Yeah, when we left off, I went back to the idea of a new normal. And when you talk about a new normal, anytime you experience something that is quote-unquote traumatic, we have a lot of people who are extremely resilient, but then you may have some folks where they're not able to bounce back as easily. And so that's where that new normal may start to come into play. And then it may look like a lot of different symptoms and whatnot, whether they sleeping issues, overeating, indulging in different ways to self-medicate and whatnot. So that's what I want to talk about and just actually bring that up when we talk about the whole idea of that new normal.
Okay, so Dr. Smith, Ms. Holloman, can somebody explain to me what constitutes a traumatizing experience, and how do you all assess for trauma? What does that look like?
Okay, I mean, well, when you say how do you assess trauma, that's the hardest one, because what's traumatizing to one person, it's not traumatizing to another person. When we think of something traumatizing, we think of something, like that gets you like, oh, this person has been raped, this person has been shot, this person has experienced, a kidnapping, a burglary, or something to that extent, some type of invasion of the privacy. So what you have to do, just look, trauma means that an event has happened that has impacted a person in a manner that's not good for them. And so you say, okay, they've had this event that's happened. So the second thing is, has this event been so horrific for them that now they have these reoccurring thoughts, whether it comes through night terrors, whether it comes through them daydreaming, whether them kind of like just zoning off on their own. It keeps popping up in their mind. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is, do they do things to avoid these steps, like anything that could become close to revisiting that trauma? We talk about triggers that can make a person get nervous again, almost they're going through that traumatizing event. Do they go through these excessive ways to try to avoid that? So if those three things happen, then what we do, we have several categories in which we can classify. The first one is acute stress disorder. That's when something has happened like immediately. So we can give you that, what we call like a working diagnosis. And we talked about this earlier in the program. Sometimes something bad happens and then we kind of get over it. So if it's in the first 30 days, you give an acute stress disorder. Anything that persists longer than 30 days, now you get into a post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's still some different variations on what they believe this can be. And this is the hard part, because when we talk about psychology and diagnosis, this is not an exact science. So what was considered trauma 5 years ago in the DSM-4 is different than what's in the DSM-5 now.
Right.
So when we start to think about that, the main thing what we look at is, okay, well, how do we deal with that? Because is trauma just a singular event, as you said, or is it what we call like complex trauma, where a person goes through something on a regular occasion? And as we talk specifically about the foster care, if you're in foster care, even if you're in a great foster home, you can still be being traumatized every day, because every day you're in that home,
Right.
it's a reminder that I'm not with my mother, I'm not with my father, I'm not maybe with all of my siblings, I'm not in a situation that I think is normal. You know, as kids, you're always thinking like, why can't I be like everybody else? Like everybody else has an ideal situation. The grass is greener on the other side. So when we
Right.
start talking about, traumatization, the main thing is those three things. An event has happened. They continue to persist and perseverate on that, and then they do different things to avoid it. Now, where it becomes kind of malfunctioning for an individual is when we go to extremes. And you had talked about that a little bit. I don't know if you want to talk about like when a parent maybe overreacts to a situation where they were traumatized.
Yeah, so during the break, we were kind of talking about different examples of how parenting changes as a result of trauma, whether that is an experienced event or that's transgenerational trauma, something that's passed down. And so we see these things with 9/11 survivors or children of Holocaust survivors, or even in the Black community. I mean, we were descendants of slaves. And so you go into the store and you'll see a Black mother with her child, and she's like, stand right next to me, don't you go anywhere, don't you move. Whereas maybe another child, the parent is allowing them to roam around, to explore, which is normal for child
And what do we be
development.
thinking in our head?
We're
Say,
thinking,
get your kid. You just
Right,
your
right,
kid.
right. Run all
What is
around
wrong
and
with
stuff.
her?
Right.
What is
But
wrong
that's
with
their
that kid don't have
experience.
no
Our
home
experience
training.
is
The
different.
world
Right.
is mine.
Right.
You know,
Right,
it's like
right.
the world
Right.
is mine to explore and to do, where we
Right.
get stuck in that
But the
little
message
spot.
we get is that the world doesn't belong to us,
Right.
and that we are not allowed, or we don't have the right to explore that world.
All right. Now, we have a winner on Fresh Start today. Patrice, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful now.
Oh, you're doing
Wow.
wonderful. Sorry for the extended hold. Are you
Congratulations.
learning something today? Are you enjoying the conversation?
Every week that I listen to you.
I'm sorry, what you say?
Every week.
Every week. Well, thanks a lot, Patrice. I appreciate you tuning in. And make sure you tell your friends and family members about the show. And we're excited to have you as a special guest at the Color Child Welfare Conference. So we'll be getting in contact with you after the show. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thank you for being there.
All right.
And I think to add to that, when Ms. Holloman talked about how we raise our children in that generational, lost my chain of thought. It's almost like when parents talk to their children about the police. Some folks in certain neighborhoods and environments may say, hey, you know what, let's go talk to this officer. Let's see if we can get some baseball cards or whatnot. So it's a non-threatening relationship. Others within the inner city may see, you know what, when you see that person, you keep your hands clear, don't move awkwardly. And so it's that whole dynamic where we're instilling a certain mind state versus other communities.
Well, part of the response when there's been some kind of collective trauma, one of the things that people within that community do is they become suspicious of outsiders. And so they keep the trauma within the community, because we understand what happened to us. We get it. We know what's going on. They don't know what we're experiencing, or they don't know how to help us, or they're here in some way or interacting with us in some way to harm us.
Now, let me ask you, because you said we keep the trauma in. Because when we grew up, every person of color that I know of, or at least from zip code 53206 where I came out of.
I grew up in 06 too.
You're 06 baby too?
Yeah.
All right. Now, we keep the trauma in. And so we were told, what goes on in my house, no matter how dysfunctional, how violent, or whatever, how good, it stays right. So we learn to house it, to keep it inside, locked down. So for someone who is non-African American or non-black, who is providing services to an African American, what are some, by you both being therapists, mental health providers, what are some tips that you can give to folks so that we can feel comfortable, because you can't relate to what I deal with and how I respond to the police and whatever, because this is part of my experience. So give some advice in terms, whether case managers, therapists, how do you build those relationships so folks can trust? Because trauma happens in the context of relationships, right? Most of the time, okay? And so we will assume that healing must also take place in the context of relationship. So how do we build relationships with folk who we don't trust or we don't know or who we believe can't identify with us?
So if we are working with people outside of our community, or if they're foster parents that are black or whatever, I mean, a part of this is cultural competence. And so not everybody's going to be culturally competent. And just because you have a black friend doesn't mean you understand all things black, right? Or your boyfriend, your boo is black, doesn't mean that you understand all things black. And so just even as,
or just because you're,
or even because, right,
you're
because you're black, because we have different experiences. So me growing up in the 06 zip code may look very different from somebody who grew up in River Hills. And so even as a counselor, if I don't understand something or I don't know something, I have to ask that person to educate me. I don't come, and part of that, the problem is we come to it as helpers and providers and foster parents as if we are all knowing. I'm coming to help you out. And
so we're the students and the client is the teacher.
Absolutely.
All right. And that's just respecting folks' journey, their humanity, their experience. What about you, Dr. Smith?
You know what? I'm a different kind of psychologist, because I'm built on love. And so if I don't love you, I can't help you. So what I did is, if you're going to help somebody, it's not an overnight thing. So they got to know you in it with them. And that's the one thing I did and it's like when they feel you're a part of the family, like you care about me. It's like what I tell them. I say when I meet with parents, I would always meet with the parents before I met with the kids to make sure they wanted to meet, talking to their children, whether it was a foster parent or biological parent. But I said, I'm gonna love your child the way I love my children. I'm going to treat your child the way I would want somebody to treat my child. When somebody hear that, and then obviously if you have years of success and then people can back up and you get referrals, that's a big thing, because then you've already, beaten that down. But what I had to do, and what I continue to do, is I let them know I'm on your side. I'm on your team. I'm not trying to make this any worse. As a doctor, as a clinician, our first rule is at worst, do no more harm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So when I come in, what I want you to understand is, hey, you know what? I'm in this with you. And this is sometimes it's like, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but it's like training day. With Denzel Washington said, sometimes people don't trust you unless you got a little dirt. Mm-hmm. I break rules, but I break rules if it's for the good of the thing. Where they say, I say, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to do it because I know it's for the better good. It's one of those things. And so when they understand that you're going above and beyond, you start to do stuff that you don't have to do, that's when you can still start to come in and you can get a little bit of trust. And then you recognize, what we were saying before, just because I trust you a little bit, okay, you got in the door, but don't think you up in my room. Don't get into my bedroom, take your shoes off, get on my bed, like that. So it's just, time, a little bit at a time. And then as you start to earn that trust, those things happen. So to everybody who's talking, don't think you're going to solve the problem overnight. Understand, it's like what you said, it's a relationship. It takes time to build and foster those relationships. So what I do is I say, what's a problem that maybe we can fix right away? Something that you feel comfortable putting into my hands. And if we can work on this together, then let's go to the next level.
Gotcha.
Because when people come into counseling, they never tell you what the biggest issue is right away. Exactly. They always come with like a filler out. Mm-hmm. Can you handle this? And if you can handle this, it's like you play a video game. You get the little easy thing to beat first, you go to the next level and go up. And that's how I think about it. So that what I tell anybody who's working with the family, it goes back to the point. I'm not better than you. We on the same level. Get that understood. And how can I help you? How can I be a part of the solution together? Because we're a team. It's not me helping you or you helping me, even like that teacher, student, teacher. But we're all in this together.
So in short, you definitely want to start where the client is. Absolutely. And I like what you said, Jermaine, when you said, when you talk about the professional being the student and allowing that individual to be the teacher so they can kind of usher and help them down the path. But then the other thing Dr. Smith said, and I think was really awesome as well, is you definitely want to warm up to people. Don't go in there with the heavy boxing gloves on as soon as you hit them with a question that's very offensive or very personal. You may just end a relationship right there. So we definitely need to keep that in mind when working with families.
Now, we've talked about mental health providers who are providing support to individuals and helping them deal with their trauma. And we are all connected to a much larger community. But when communities are experiencing widespread trauma, how should the mental health community respond to support folks on a community level?
No. That's a great question, because if there's a tragedy at a school, they'll bring a counselor in, some type of counselor,
Yes.
and say, hey, let's talk about this as a group. And I think what it comes into our community is what makes that difficult is they say, I'm sick of talking about this. This is the 18th child that done been hurt like this. So how much we going to talk? How much we going to heal? It's about what's the action of doing. So I think coming in to talk about it, to get those emotions off, say how can we express ourselves in a positive manner so whatever we decide to do, and I think that's the next step of that meeting, have an action plan, say how do we solve this? So it's not just about talking about it, getting frustration out, but what are the real action plans so we are seeing progress. We are seeing it. And I think what makes talking difficult is when you just talk and nothing comes from it.
I think one of the areas where we might fall short is because that's what happens if there's a natural disaster or if there's a man-made trauma like school shooting or something like that. But when a girl gets gang raped in her neighborhood and there are people that are watching, nobody's rushing in, whether that's the Red Cross or, mental health professionals or whatever. Nobody's rushing in.
I'm glad you brought that point because
work.
when we look at the number of African American males who are killed by gun violence in a community by someone who looks like them.
Right.
Now, if a white police officer shoots a black male or black man, black boy, we will lay out in the middle of the street. We will stop traffic on a freeway, semis and all, because we're outraged at what happened to this black male. But in truth, we see these homicides. How many? 4 teenagers got shot, not too long. And then the next day is something else, next day. Yeah. And so when we start talking about community trauma, then you look at the makeshift memorials, and this way folks are honoring or grieving. How do we deal with that? Why aren't we strategic and not just emotional, but strategic in our response to deal with that? Because when you talk about school a crisis response they provide to students, the fact that Johnny was your classmate yesterday and dead today, and then last year it was so-and-so, and the year or 2 years before that it was Ricky, and it was my cousin, and all of these traumatic events that are occurring. What's the strategy?
Well, I think a part of it is starting with changing the way we think about the victims of these situations. So as a society, we tend to think good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And so if you got shot, like the two guys, there were 2 young men that got shot in a car yesterday. One of them died. Or, the recent shootings of the young black boys and, all these other things that are happening in communities, police shooting black men and black boys. If we see those people as people who are bad people deserving of whatever they receive, then we're not going to step in to help.
So do we become desensitized to some degree because of...
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the propaganda of the media is to oversaturate us with these things where when it happens, you say, another person got shot. It's sad. And next in the news, it's like, and what's next? But to your point is, I think we should be outraged when you have a police officer shoot someone. We hold police officers to a higher standard because they're committed to serving. So when we see something, to your point, that's been like just so egregious of what you're supposed to do, well, then there should be an outcry. But it's like you said, there should be the same type of outcry when that happens within our community. But to say that nothing is being done, I think is the mistake that we have because we follow that propaganda to me. Nobody's going to go to Muhammad Mosque number 3 tonight, when they have the follow-up, when they talked about, the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, Farrakhan is a divider and whatnot like that. But when he's talking about, hey, you know what, everybody go back to your community and see what you can do. Brother William Muhammad is over there trying to organize now. How can we get conflict resolution lines? How can we talk with our community and what we're doing? But we don't hear about that type of stuff. And so what we have to do is make sure that people understand there are things going on. It's not like we accept it, even though, your theory is true. Bad things happen to bad people. And you're like, it's kind of karma, kind of street justice or whatnot like that. We do have a sector society that cares, and for those of us who do care, we have to make sure that we let that voice be known. So when people say, well, you don't do this, say, no, we do it. It's just a different way in which you police that. Laying down on the street is not going to bring attention to that situation. You have to bring it in-house in a different manner. And like I said, the brothers at Muhammad Mosque number 3, just right up the street on Atkinson, they're going to meet tonight at 7 o'clock, talking about these things. How are we localizing, the 10,000 fearless to say, how do we regain our community back?
So what are the signs of collective trauma? And I'll let you speak just 1 second, Mr. Roby. What are the signs of collective trauma on a community level? I mean, is it a sense of widespread hopelessness. And the reason why I'm asking that is because we've been on this format, this station, for a year and some months, maybe like a year and a half, talking about something that is egregious. We're talking about folks who lose their children. We're not talking about their cars, their houses.
Right.
You lost your boyfriend. We're talking about folks who have lost their children to a system. Some of these kids never return back home for a number of reasons, And I'm not implying that everybody is fit to parent, their child. Ideally, we would like to see that, but there's some folks shouldn't have goldfish. Don't even give them a plant, anything that's living. They're gonna die. My thing is, when we talk about these issues, we've been on this platform, there still seems to be some sense of despondency and apathy, lack of response. We're not talking about, foolishness. If we had a program, we're talking about affairs and all this kind of stuff, and baby mama this, baby daddy, the lines will blow
TV.
up. Exactly. But we're talking about what folks can do from our strategic response
see, that's
to
part
the
of
crisis.
the trauma, because it's this. We talk about self-medicating. Well, we self-medicate with television. I want to be drowned. That's a way for me to disengage with everything else. I don't even want to hear about it because it's too much.
Is that where drugs possibly can come into play?
No, that's definitely
that's
another way to
Coping
alter your
mechanism.
reality of what's going on.
Alter
For me
your
to
reality.
talk about it is like this. I was playing with my son. And so I said, I'm going to find you. So he closes his eyes, puts his hand over his eyes. See, he's invisible to himself, so he think like he's invisible to me, but he's right there. And that's what we do so many times. We close our eyes and be like, okay, I don't see it. It's not here. But it's even ever present. So what we have to do is just recognize that fact that it's right there and understand that part of the trauma is how do we get people to engage in the conversation, because it's so hard, it's so difficult that we say, I don't even want to deal with it. It's too much.
Touch
Yeah.
it. Is that what happens in therapy too, where it's just so difficult, it's so hard to visit that place?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay, yeah.
absolutely. And one of the messages we get as a community is, what are you talking about this for? We're so strong that we don't know how weak we are.
Right.
And so, when we get these messages continually, like, girl, what are you talking about that for? Or nothing wrong with you, or you made it, or whatever the case may be, then people get the message, it's not okay to feel what I'm feeling, and I cannot talk about that because it's unacceptable for whatever reason. And so they
And that
hold
goes
that
back
in.
into what you said. What goes on in this house stays in this house. Some of us still hold on to that philosophy
to this day, yeah.
because you don't know if it is talked on the outside how it will be, received, or what may happen.
All right, we have a caller on Fresh Start today. Good afternoon, caller.
Yes, good afternoon to you and your guest.
Good afternoon. Yep.
You definitely hit something right on the point. I think that the masses of the people in the community, a lot of them, man, they just embrace ignorance, and versus just common sense. And it seems like what we dealing with is just, I don't know, people just totally trying to abort the situation. But I think a lot of people, man, they got to do some stuff. Reality, internal, soul searching. So I'm gonna be real brief with it, but I'm definitely, tuning into the program, and I wish I could be with the brothers up there, man, at the mosque, but I can't because I'm out here on this road. So but I'll tune in, man. But yeah, I think a lot of people in our community, man, is just wow, So, but. Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much for listening to Fresh Start today on WNOV, The Voice. We're going to take a brief break. The bee's getting caught up. A brief break, and then after the break, caller number 5, if you would like to win a free registration to the Color Child Welfare Conference, you can call 414-444-5250. Pick up the phone now and call 414-444-5250 for a free registration to the Color Child Welfare Conference. We'll be right back. All right, you're listening to Fresh Start today. We have a few more minutes on the air, and this has been a very informative conversation. Enjoy having Dr. Ramel Smith and Anita Holloman and Mr. Roby here in the studio with us today, talking about the impact of collective trauma on child and family community well-being. So we've kind of touched on what collective trauma is. We've talked about how we, from a community standpoint, have traditionally dealt with trauma or these negative experiences. We've talked about the different types of trauma or levels, like it's 1, 2, 3, or what do you call it, chronic and single events. But we So we're engaged in this conversation. If you would like to have a brief question or comment or participate, you can call 414-444-5250. Now, let me read something, and I want to get a response from you two. I was reading this today. The collective experiences of African-American young adults can be considered a reflection of cultural trauma or slave legacies which impact their psychosocial functioning. Cultural trauma theory asserts that despite historical collective resilience, African Americans broadly have experienced and continue to experience an accumulation of disproportionate pains, slights, and injustices born of chattel slavery. That kind of reminds what you're talking about earlier. We were talking about stabbing you in the back. You know, what are your thoughts about what I just read?
I mean, I think it's like what you said. It happens to us every day. There's a term that we use when we do cultural diversity, what we call microaggressions. Okay. And this is a way in which you're insulted from a race standpoint where people might not even know. So like when we talk about it widely in the community, examples like we say, oh, that's the black sheep of the family, or that's a black eye. You know, why is everything associated with black always negative and whatnot? Well, we hear these type of microaggressions all day, every day. And sometimes like those who perpetuate this or those who assert these things don't even know they're doing it. But those are the things that we hear and that we take in. And so when you start to hear those things, they do create an inferiority complex. They do create a frustration and an anger, and then sometimes the manifestation of how those things come out. That's where you get the angry black person, the angry black woman, or the militant person. If a person has black pride, all of a sudden they're militant. So it's all those things that they do that the larger society in general can do to help suppress a person's thought and to be able to actually deal with it.
Well, let me ask you. Go ahead.
I was going to say sometimes those microaggressions are given off as if they are in the positive way.
A compliment.
So, yeah, compliment. You're so articulate. And it's like, well, is everybody else not able to speak? I mean, what does that mean? Or
so why would you say that to me and not this white person right here?
Right.
Like that's a special thing.
But
Yeah.
when you talked about certain folks' disposition or the behavior, they may come off as being angry or militant. You know, and I think sometimes people confuse militant with being outspoken or outspoken as being militant.
Absolutely.
And talking about within the community, in-house conversation here, I think sometimes when an African-American male or female, regardless to what field you're working in, if you're too outspoken, we will even distance ourselves from you.
That's that dude.
Wow.
And I'm that dude, so I understand that because you'd be like,
Don't
"Man, you
nobody
should be
want to
in
sit
this
by
with
me. Don't nobody
Right,
want to
right.
sit
It's
by
like-
me. You know, but we do
this
that.
reminds me of Dr. Joy DeGrew's, post-traumatic
Mhm.
slave syndrome.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
So, it's this passing on of, these things from chattel slavery that we don't even realize that we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Wow.
And and the thing is this, it's like we always get these insults. So every time like I watch a show like Underground or 12 Years a Slave or Roots or the Book of Negroes or whatever, that's traumatizing in itself, seeing it over again. And it's almost like you punishing yourself over again. Even though you got to understand this history, you got to understand it. You want to get some of the grasp of it. It's still like that. And so that's how a lot of the stuff in our society is for. It's like, even when we're trying to do good, we're trying to learn. It's like, it's obstacles. It's like an obstacle course with a lot of deadly things in our way. It's very difficult to navigate through this journey of life as an African-American person in a system that's been set up, that was designed for the beginning never to love us or respect us. And so it's difficult.
And you know what? This has been a great conversation. I need to make one announcement before we go off air. Fresh Start Family Services is a foster care agency, and we have been in business serving our community for 13 or plus years. And so if you are an individual and you've really been thinking about possibly opening up your home, your heart to care for one of our children, I think it's really important because the more families that we have licensed in this area, it prevents children from having to be sent way out of county, 2 and 3 and 4 hours away from, that's a traumatic experience to some degree. And so if you're interested, you can call 414-351-1100. Now, we need folks who are caring, loving, responsive, culturally responsive, spend time with children, not using children as supplemental income, but you're really concerned about that individual. Now, if you're one of those people that, you don't like kids, that you don't want to apply to be a foster parent, it's not for you. It's not for you. And you don't like kids, then you might want to do something different. But if you have the heart and you also want to not just provide services, but find ways that you can support those birth families. So hopefully one day there will be no need for foster care or foster care to the degree that it exists today. Right. Thank you for tuning in to Fresh Start today. Be well, be safe. Until next time.